Roman Senate leaves Rome when some invaders come in, and they just disappear, and there's no government left. Now, I come from Washington, D.C., and a lot of people sort of wish that would happen there, but it's a mess when you have no government. Nobody's there to pay the soldiers. Nobody's there to take out the trash. Nobody's there to keep the mail going. And so the remaining nobles in the city come to the Pope, Pope Gregory, and they said, listen, we're in a mess. Could you help us? Could you help us run the city? And so something fascinating happens at 500 AD. It's like 500 inches of rain happening in a week. When you're done with that period of time, the maps of the world are different. And the new world is what we call the Middle Ages, or the medieval world. And it's a world where the church and the state are working closely together, where you don't have one dominating political empire, but you have the influence of the church in Western civilization, at least, being the glue that holds civilization together. And it's a fascinating period. It lasts about 1,000 years. But you get to about 1500 AD, and you have another convergence of phenomenal change. You have a new communication technology, the printing press. Writing was monumental 2500 BC, but 1500 AD, the printing press changes the world in phenomenal ways. You have new weapons technology, you have guns, you have infantry, you have cavalry that changes the world in phenomenal ways. Artillery changes the world in phenomenal ways. You have a spiritual kind of new movement, this Reformation movement with Martin Luther, which Protestants tend to think was a good thing, although sometimes we all have our second thoughts. Then there was new transportation technology. Man, that one changed the world. This multi-masted transoceanic sailing vessel, the caravel, makes possible all kinds of unbelievable things. Remember the conquistadors? They come to the New World. They bring back literally boatloads of gold that makes Europe unfathomably rich compared to what they've been before. It also makes possible them going down and finding slaves in Africa and exporting slaves around the world. Tragic consequences. It also makes possible the influx of huge numbers of new people into the New World. And so many of our ancestors came here and stole the lands of the people who lived here. The thought never crossed our mind that they belonged here and that they'd owned these lands. We just took them. And in addition to taking the lands, we brought with us gifts, smallpox, and venereal disease. And we killed millions and millions of people through our diseases. The world changed. The maps changed because of this new transportation technology, new ways of thinking we don't have time to get into, but a whole new view of the universe. In fact, if you go to the next slide, Copernicus and Galileo come up with this small adjustment in the map of the universe. Instead of the Earth being in the center with 10 concentric spheres, each of which holds some planets and stars, they make a slight adjustment. Let's put the sun in the center. And boy, with this, you have to hear, shrieks of anguish, because people had thought that this view of the world with the earth in the center and the Bible went right together. And if you bring down that earth-centered view of the world, they thought the Bible, the gospel, the church, the Christian faith will go down with it. And there was bitter debate and bitter argument. It wasn't just the Catholics who opposed this. Martin Luther, John Calvin, they all were against Copernicus, and their successors were against Galileo as well. So amazing changes happened 500 years ago and brought us to this new world that we call the modern world. Let's say it's born in 1500. Let's say that it kind of reaches its adulthood in about 1750. And let's say right now it's in the prime of life. But many of us believe that in the last 50 years or so, a lot of us believe another 100 inches of rain has been falling and that our world is going through another major change in its landscape. Not everybody agrees with this, but a lot of people, more and more people are starting to think, yes, something's going on. And what we've grown used to as the modern world is now giving birth to some new kind of world, a world that's different. When you think about it, there's new communication technology. First you have the telephone, of course, telegraph telephone, but then you have the television and the screen, and then the internet. And it's very hard to overestimate how much the world will change because of these new communication technologies. It's very hard to overestimate it. In fact, I just was hearing recently about a theory that's out right now that says when you write with your hand, you write with most people with a right hand, which strengthens the left side of the brain. And there's a theory that's developing now that says when most of your communication is done, written communication is done through typing, what you strengthen is the interaction of both sides of the brain. And they believe that we're going through a major neural rewiring right now. Could be true. A whole new approach to science. How many of you were taught that the world, that matter is composed of protons, neutrons, and electrons? Yeah, I mean, that is so 20th century. You have no idea what they're talking about now. It's a whole new understanding of science. And we don't even have to say anything about new weapons technology. I mean, if guns and cannons changed the world 500 years ago, think about atom bombs in the last 60 or so years. And then think about biological and chemical weapons, and think about terrorism and suicide bombers, and you start to get a feel for who knows how that will change the world. New transportation. Think about how airplanes change the world. Cars, trains, automobiles. I'm not just thinking about the movie with John Candy and Steve Martin, although it was a pretty funny movie. New spirituality. Whole new approaches to spirituality. 50 years ago, people thought that religion was on its way out. 50 years ago, people thought that science and government would answer all of humanity's questions, and that religion, the sun was setting. But now everybody knows this spirituality is here to stay. People seem to be incurably religious. So our choice isn't between religion and no religion. Our choice is between good religion and bad religion. And then whole new ways of thinking that we could talk more about if we had more time. One scientist, or historian, a philosopher of science, Thomas Kuhn, described it like this. When you have 100 inches of rainfall, you have a period of time where people have an old paradigm or an old methodology and an old way of thinking. Then there's an early transition period when people are very negative and very cynical and very critical. They're angry about how the old system doesn't answer the questions anymore. And that frustration eventually gives way to a late transition period where then people start saying it's not enough to complain about how bad the old system is. Let's start dreaming about the new system. And that gives birth to this new system or new paradigm. And a number of people, I'm one of them, think that we're not in that new paradigm yet. We're far from there, but we're in this transition period. Some of us are in the negative stage. Others of us are trying to get a little more constructive. But we don't know what this new paradigm is going to be yet. But we're in the process. And there's this sense, the new road hasn't been built. The new bridge hasn't been built. But a lot of us are saying the old one doesn't seem to be working anymore. A scientist, looking back on Albert Einstein, a lot of his discoveries that contributed to the new science, said, a new scientific truth does not triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the light, but rather because its opponents eventually die and a new generation grows up that is familiar with it. And if that's true in the world of science, how much more true it would be in the world of religion, where so much more is at stake. And so many of us find ourselves struggling with old paradigms and old ways of thinking. We really love that old bridge. And the fact that it's not working anymore really causes us pain. What we want to do is get out the bulldozers and dig out the riverbed and get the river back where it belongs and bring in some fill dirt and make everything the way it used to be. But others of us are saying, well, no, this is the new world. Change happens. We've got to figure out how to deal with it. God isn't walking around in heaven going, oh, myself? What am I going to do about this, you know? He's not upset. He's not worried. He's not, his blood pressure isn't, he's not in a nervous breakdown danger zone. But rather, God is with us through all these changes, these past storms, these past epical changes, these paradigm changes of the past. They didn't surprise God, and that we feel that we can cope with it. And so that's what we're going to be talking about this weekend. What does it mean to be Christians? What would it mean if you became a very, very effective modern Christian, and then the world changed under your feet into a postmodern world, and you were still practicing your faith for a world that no longer exists? What would that mean? They're challenging questions, and they're a little bit scary, but that's what we're going to be thinking about this weekend. I'm going to bring Jim Henderson up, and actually what I'd like to do right now is, before I bring Jim up, is say a little exercise for you. I'd like you to stand up and find one or two people, preferably not someone you came with,